When God calls you, how obedient are you? In Proverbs 3, we read, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will direct your paths." I think for most of us, when God calls us, when God tells us what we need to be doing, we're not trusting him with all our heart. We're not following his ways. We're not recognising that his ways are not our ways. We're leaning on our own understanding, and we're knowing that in our own strength, in our own power, we are not sufficient. We are not enough. We are not able to do what he's called us to do. And that makes us frightened. It makes us full of fear. It makes us think, how could God possibly choose me for a job like this? Whatever it may be. It may be you've been called to speak. You may have been asked to be a missionary in another country. It may be a job that you've been called to, which you think you're not qualified enough for, that somebody else should be doing it. It may be a role in the church that other people have identified as your calling, and yet you feel so ill-equipped. And yet the Bible says, trust in the Lord and lean not on your own understanding. Acknowledge him, and acknowledging him is recognising that when he's spoken to you in prayer, or when the call has been placed on your life, when other people have told you about that and it's been prayed about, that is God's speaking to you, that's God's calling, that's acknowledging him and saying, yes, Lord. And when we falter, and when we don't go ahead with that straight away, that's when we're not being obedient, that's when we're falling short. That's when we question God, when we don't believe him and when we don't trust him. And yet, God is the creator. He is the great I am. He created the earth. He created us. He knows everything about us. He knows who he called us to be. He knows that we are inadequate. He knows we are ill-equipped. And yet it's in our weakness that he is made strong. If we think about characters in the Bible, if we think about Moses in the Bible, I'm going to read to you now from Exodus. And in Exodus 3, God is talking to Moses, and God is saying to Moses, I am with you, and I am going to take you out of Egypt, and I am going to give you the promised land. But Moses, I want you to lead your people. And Moses is trying in every way he can to say, just a minute, God, I'm not sure about this. I don't think I want to do this. And if we move on to Exodus 4, we read, but Moses protested again. Look, they won't believe me. They won't do what I tell them. They'll just say, the Lord never appeared to you. Then the Lord asked him, what do you have there in your hand? A shepherd's staff, Moses replied. Throw it down on the ground, the Lord told him. So Moses threw it down and it became a snake. Moses was terrified, so he turned and ran away. The Lord said to him, take hold of its tail. So Moses reached out and grabbed it, and it became a shepherd's staff again. Perform this sign, and they will believe you, the Lord told him. Then they will realize that the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob really has appeared to you. And if we read on, God is giving Moses other ways in which he can prove to the Egyptians that he really has heard from God. And yet Moses has God right there with him and is still questioning God. He's having signs and wonders performed before him. And Moses still says, I don't want to do this, God. And if we move on, Moses says, But Lord, please send someone else. And the Lord became angry with Moses. All right, he said, what about your brother Aaron, the Levite? He is a good speaker, and look, he is on his way to meet you now. And when he sees you, he will be very glad. You will talk to him, giving him the words to say, and I will help you both to speak very clearly. I think there's an important message in there. I think when we are disobedient, when we question God and when we fight and argue with him, when we have a word at church and we refuse to speak it out, when we've been given something to do and yet we hold back and don't do it, God will find another servant. He will find another disciple who is willing to do that job. And it says here that God became angry. And he heard Moses. He didn't force him, but he said, okay, well, let's use your brother then. And God chose to use Moses' brother too to speak to the Egyptians. I think as well, if we move on and we look at Judges, we've got another example of a servant of God, somebody who God chose, who really felt that they were ill-equipped. We've got Gideon. And Gideon is out in the fields. And I think he's threshing out in the fields. And God comes to him and speaks to him. So we read, Gideon, son of Joash, had been threshing wheat at the bottom of a winepress to hide the grain from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, Mighty hero, the Lord is with you. Sir, Gideon replied, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles our ancestors told us about? Didn't they say the Lord brought us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites. Then the Lord turned to him and said, Go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you. But Lord, Gideon replied, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family. The Lord said to him, I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man. So clearly God's saying, trust me, I am with you. I will not let you fall. I won't let you falter. You will win this battle. And yet, as we read on, Gideon is testing God. Gideon is not sure. Gideon is asking God to prove himself. Gideon replied, If you are truly going to help me, show me a sign to prove that it is really the Lord speaking to me. Don't go away until I come back and bring my offering to you. The Lord answered, I will stay here until you return. And as we read on, we find that Gideon tests God several times, and yet God shows nothing but patience. And in the end, Gideon is satisfied and goes out and defeats the armies. And yet he's reluctant. He doesn't believe that he can do these things. And if we read on in the Bible, there are so many examples of ordinary people being chosen by God to do extraordinary works. And so my question for you today is, are you obedient? Are you listening to God? Are you doing what God has called you to do? Or are you questioning him? Are you testing him? Are you refusing him? Are you falling short? And are you ultimately not finding out what your true calling is? Hilltop City.